I am very honored and pleased to introduce Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati, who is a university professor at Columbia University and a senior fellow in international economics at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a native of India. Professor Bhagwati attended Cambridge University, where he graduated in 1956 with a first in economics, tripos. He then continued to study at MIT and Oxford, returning to India in 1961 as professor of economics at the Indian Statistical Institute, and then as professor of international trade at the Delhi School of Economics. He returned to MIT in 1968, leaving it 12 years later as the Ford International Professor of Economics to join Columbia. He has been economic policy advisor to Arthur Dunkel, Director General of GATT, Special Advisor to the UN on Globalization, External Advisor to the World Trade Organization. He served on the expert group appointed by the Director General of the WTO on the future of the WTO and the advisory committee, and on the advisory committee to Secretary General Kofi Annan on the NEPAD process in Africa. 5 volumes of his scientific writings and 2 of his public policy essays have been published by MIT Press. He has received several prizes and honorary degrees, and including awards from the governments of India and of Japan. Professor Bhagwati's latest book, In Defense of Globalization, was published by Oxford University Press in 2004 to worldwide acclaim. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Bhagwati.
This is on. Yeah, it's on. Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. It's a very impressive body of people, this audience, which I'm sure you know much more about the subject than I do. But what I've done, therefore, is to draw back and talk about sort of broader issues into which online teaching can fit in. So I would first start with how the modern economy, well, in fact, even traditional economists for that matter, rely on skills and knowledge. I mean, that's the first thing. The second thing, which I'll go on to discuss, is how online technology can be used to, in the service of actually building up the skills. Okay, so it'll be a 2-part lecture. And I am quite conscious, as I said, of my modest knowledge of online. So it's not totally modest, but certainly I'm not a specialist in the subject. Okay, so the way I want to approach a thing is by distinguishing between developing countries and developed countries, particularly the United States, because the issues are a little bit different as far as the skills issue is concerned and the way you approach the problem also. I will be concentrating mainly on the United States because I don't know that much about the European situation. Okay. Now, the role of skills is extremely important, and I think it's more or less understood now because we always talk of the knowledge economy, and any discussion that you have of development brings in skill levels and so on. So let me just tell you how exactly it fits in, because there's nothing like one size fits all. We are often reminded that one size doesn't fit all, and there are always some people who need to be reminded about it. So why anyone who is sophisticated needs to be reminded is a bit absurd. And 2, when you say one size fits all, it can be pretty ridiculous to say that, because when we do social science, and I'm an economist, as you know, as you were told, we also look for generalizations. So, is free trade good for you? Well, that is something we have come to after a whole lot of research in the post-war period. Now, that doesn't mean I go and tell my prime minister, slash all trade barriers. That is where the one-size-fits-all has to be abandoned. But that we want to go to is that goal, because that's what our current learning tells us is really something we need to remember. Because otherwise, the World Bank, where one of you is, right? You are, You can't expect the 8,000 economists there to be doing their own thing depending on which country they are going to. They have to have some guidelines, some formulation which says that is more or less where you want to go, as of our current knowledge. So I think when I pick one area, which I notice are people from Singapore and so on, and that's East Asia, to show the role of skills. Okay. Now, skills, of course, can be at the primary level, meaning education, literacy. It can be at higher levels. Okay. So both are illustrated well by East Asia's success, because you know East Asia was a miracle for decades. Grew very rapidly, transformed itself in a remarkable way. And in a way, it's just a reflection on the state of economics as a dismal science, that anytime some country does well, we call it a miracle. They did very well, exceptionally well. But it had nothing to do just with export orientation, which is what generally we talk about, namely that unlike countries like my country, India, and China also during that period, which turned inwards, these countries turned outwards at the end of the 50s after an initial period of import substitution. But that in itself would not have led to great results. But what happened was that once they started exporting in a massive way, they imported a whole lot of machinery from outside, and that went into investment. Now, investment became profitable because it was profitable to export. So you had the inducement to invest, all right? You had the capacity to invest in technology embodied machinery. When that machinery came in, if it was just a matter of just putting people to work on it, that would be fine. But actually, you need to be able to handle the machinery, all right? Which means literacy matters. Like I have a DVD, and it's got all the latest gadgets, which is probably the only thing you can buy. And all I do is, start and stop. There are all kinds of other functions which I know nothing about. So I'm an illiterate person from the point of view of operating my DVD. So the productivity is very low, assuming, it is productive to watch DVDs and play with it. I would rather be writing my books, actually. But generally speaking, that's true. So I think what you have, therefore, is a situation where the workers in the Far Eastern economies had the literacy for a variety of reasons. In some cases because of Japanese occupation and the Japanese preoccupation with learning. So if you know Japan's history, which I do, you see the emphasis on education, actually, and that what provided the literacy levels, very high literacy levels. But that's itself not sufficient, because you also need the skilled people at the top to run it. And all these countries actually had very important policies to train people, to send them out to MIT, Columbia, whatever, all sorts of universities, bring them back. And so that is what you had, an active policy by the existing governments on having the skills. So that is what led to very high rate of return on this strategy, right? Extremely productive. So you had both at the bottom level and at the higher level. And so I think one was inherited by and large, the other was actually conscious policy. So I think the fact that you need skills is very nicely illustrated by the East Asian example. Of course, the whole system crashed afterwards for a long, but that was because of extensive capital account liberalization. That's another story, okay? And that's also been much written about. So I think that's one thing which I would just like to emphasize. I could tell a similar story about some other countries. And in fact, if you want to discuss China and India, they also need, India is much more behind on literacy levels. It's catching up now, and that has been a problem. It's not that it will prevent you from exploiting an export strategy and so on. It's just that the rate of return from it will be low if you're not productive, right? So it is not whether, but by how much, right, that you profit from it. So I think that is something to keep in mind. So let me now come to the United States, okay? So I think I'll just leave the developing countries and say this is an issue of importance today if you want to have good, sustained, rapid growth. As far as the US is concerned, we now have to worry about skills also in a very big way. And so let me look at it from, first just say there are several policies which interact with skill formation in this country, and in fact in most other developed countries. One is, if you look at the policy on immigration, that is something which is widely discussed. In US's great advantage has been, it's been open, not in the sense of this conference, but it's been open, and people have been able to come in. It's a country of immigrants, all right? Illegal immigration is a different problem because it's a right brain, left brain problem. Because Americans, I'm a first generation immigrant, because Americans are basically law and order oriented. So if something is illegal, that immediately touches off alarm bells in the left brain. At the same time, these are immigrants, so that's the right brain, which is a good thing, right? We are a country of immigrants. So you people are schizophrenic, actually, and they're polarized, basically on this one. But essentially, our immigration policy, at least at the level of skilled immigration, which is what we talk about, is actually being open. However, it's been limited so far because US is the only country in the world which heavily relies on refugees, meaning it's a more open door for refugees, and for family reunification. Those are not skill-oriented. I mean, you don't get to be a refugee if you're skilled compared to an unskilled one. At least you're not supposed to get that advantage. What happens in practice may be a little more complicated. And actually, family reunification also builds in skills for a reason which is actually, my friend from Chicago, would tell you, which is that if I'm going to marry somebody and bring them in under what is called the sixth preference in our immigration laws, meaning for family reunification, and if I just go for an arranged marriage, which most people do in my part of the world, whom am I going to pick? This is an economic hypothesis. I'm going to pick someone who is going to produce a higher rate of return for the family than someone who's going to produce a lower rate of return. Therefore, I'll marry a doctor, probably, or somebody skilled. And actually, the funny thing is, economics sometimes does work out. And it's compatible with common sense like this. And so increasingly over time, the skill level of the sixth preference marriages and so on really has actually moved up. But that's just funny, it's a funny but true story. Okay, so basically we have not gone in for simply doing what many other countries like Canada and Australia do, which is to assign points depending on your skill level and biasing the legal immigration quotas towards the skilled people. And now I think we are increasingly discussing that, but it will never be quite that, simply because of the tradition and the culture of the United States. But I think in the current recession, actually there's been even a kind of backtracking, because we have two ways in which we bring in people legally. One is through the third preference, where we go through clearance by the Immigration Service and then go straight into having worker certification or requirement certification. We can then go and sponsor people to come in. But there are also temporary visas, which are called H-1B visas, for those of you who are not here. Therefore, bringing in people on a temporary basis. A lot of them continue to stay on. But this is where you have the big fights. And actually, right now, so a lot of people are saying this is crazy because the United States has built itself up on the basis of skilled immigration as well, because these are the people who come in, create jobs. You go to Silicon Valley. In the old days, we used to add Wall Street, but now it's only if you want to destroy yourself that you bring in people from outside and strengthen that sector. Just a joke, okay?